The silver bit into her wrists like teeth, and the smell that rose from her own skin was something she would never forget. Not the clean burn of a candle flame or the sharp sting of a cooking accident. This was deeper. This was the smell of wet iron and rendered fat of something alive being slowly cooked from the outside in, and she kept her jaw clenched so tight she could hear her own molars grinding over the hiss of the chains. 3 silver links. That was all they had used. 3 links wrapped around each wrist bolted to the granite face of the cliff, and the hunters had laughed about the economy of it. Why waste good silver on an Omega who could barely shift? 3 links was generous, they said. 3 links was more than she deserved. Lyra pressed her spine against the cold rock and tried to breathe through her mouth. The chains had been on for maybe 20 minutes. Already the skin beneath them had gone from red to white to something that looked like the belly of a fish left too long in the sun. Blistered. Splitting. She could feel the silver leaching into her bloodstream like slow poison, and her wolf, that weak and flickering thing that had never once fully surfaced, was howling somewhere deep in the basement of her chest. She was 23 years old. She had been the unofficial healer of the Greymoor pack for 6 of those years, mixing poultices from wild comfrey and yarrow in a lean-to shed behind the pack kitchen, because no one would let her use the actual infirmary. She could set a broken bone by touch alone. She could smell infection before it turned a wound hot. And none of that mattered now, because she had done the one thing she had promised herself she would never do. She had volunteered. The hunters had come to the border 3 days ago, 5 of them in a black truck with no plates, and a cargo bed full of wolfsbane grenades and silver-tipped crossbow bolts. They were not the usual poachers who stumbled into pack territory, drunk and stupid. These were professionals, guild-trained from the way they moved. And they were not hunting wolves at random. They were hunting the Alpha King. Lyra had heard the name the way everyone in the Northern Territories heard it. Kael Voss, Alpha of the Ironmoor pack, King of the 3 Ranges, the man whose wolf was so large that scouts who had seen it from a distance described it not as a wolf at all, but as a weather event, a shadow that moved across the tree line like a storm front. He had united 3 warring packs in a single winter. He had torn out the throat of a rogue alpha in front of 1,000 witnesses, and then carried the dead wolf's orphaned pup back to his den in his own jaws, still slick with blood. He was also, according to the hunters, worth approximately $4 million alive. The guild wanted him sedated, caged, and delivered to a facility in the south. Something about research. Something about his bloodline being genetically unique. Lyra did not know the details and didn't care. What she knew was that the hunters had set up camp on the eastern ridge directly above the narrow pass that connected Greymoor territory to the Ironmoor border, and that Kael Voss had been spotted moving through that pass 3 nights in a row. He was coming south, no one knew why, and the hunters had positioned their trap exactly where he would walk. The trap was simple, elegant even if you had no soul. Chain a wolf to the rocks at the mouth of the pass. A female, preferably. Let the silver do its work. The scent of burning shifter skin would carry for miles on the mountain wind, and any alpha worth his fangs would come to investigate. Not out of kindness necessarily. Out of instinct. Out of the deep biological imperative that made every dominant wolf twitch at the smell of a packmate in pain. The hunters didn't know that Lyra was not Ironmoor. They didn't care. A burning Omega was a burning Omega. The scent would be the same. What they also didn't know, and what Lyra herself had only half understood when she stepped forward and offered her wrists, was that she was not doing this for Greymoor. She was not doing this because Alpha Renna, that soft-bellied coward who led her pack with all the conviction of a man reading instructions off a cereal box, had ordered her to. Renner had not ordered anything. Renner had been in his study with the curtains drawn, pretending the hunters did not exist, because confronting them would mean confronting the possibility that his territory bordered the most dangerous alpha alive, and Renner didn't confront things. Renner delegated. Renner looked away. No. Lyra had volunteered because of what she had found in the pass 2 nights ago, while gathering moonwort for a poultice. A den. Not a wolf den. A makeshift shelter tucked into a crevice between 2 boulders, lined with dried moss and a single wool blanket that smelled of pine resin and something coppery. And inside the shelter, curled around a water flask, was a pup. Not a baby. A child. Maybe 4 years old in human form, with dark hair matted against a feverish forehead and a wound on her left leg that had gone septic. The green-black streaks of infection ran from her ankle to her knee. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, the breath of a small animal whose body was starting to lose the argument with its own immune system. Lyra had treated the wound. She had cleaned it with boiled water from her canteen, packed it with yarrow and raw honey, and wrapped it in strips torn from her own undershirt. The child had not woken, but the blanket, when Lyra pressed her face to it, carried a scent that made her own wolf stir for the first time in years. Pine. Iron. Ozone before a lightning strike. The smell of something vast and barely contained. The blanket belonged to Kyle Voss. The pup was his. And the hunters were going to walk right past her to get to him, and they were going to find the den, and they were going to find the child, and they were going to use her as leverage, or leave her to die in the cold. So Lyra had gone to the hunters' camp at dawn. She had walked up to the largest one, a man with a jaw like a cinder block and silver rings on every finger, and she had said, "I know where the Alpha King walks. I can give you a better position. But I want payment. Cash. Enough to leave pack territory." The hunter had looked at her threadbare sweater with the sleeves pushed up past her elbows, at the old burn scar that ran from her left ear to her collarbone, a souvenir from the night her father's cabin had caught fire when she was 9, at her bare feet because she had sold her last pair of boots 2 months ago to buy antibiotics for a pup in the pack nursery who had whooping cough. He had smiled, and then he had grabbed her wrist and snapped the first silver link around it, and she had understood with a clarity that felt almost peaceful that she had miscalculated nothing. This was always how it was going to go. The Omega offers herself. The hunters take what is offered. The den stays hidden. The child lives. Fair trade. That had been 20 minutes ago. Now the silver was eating through the 4th layer of skin on her left wrist, and the pain had moved past the point where her brain could process it as pain and into something else entirely. A frequency. A hum. Like standing too close to a high-voltage power line and feeling your fillings vibrate. The 5 hunters were arranged in a loose semicircle around the mouth of the pass, 50 yards from where Lyra hung. 2 in the rocks above. 1 behind a fallen pine. 2 more in a shallow gully, their crossbows resting on bipods. They were patient. They were quiet. They chewed jerky and checked their sights, and did not look at her because she was not a person to them. She was a lure. She was bait on a hook, and you didn't make eye contact with bait. The wind shifted. Lyra felt it before she understood it. A pressure change, like the moment before a thunderclap, when the air itself seems to flinch. The hair on her arms rose. Her wolf, that half-dead ember she had carried her whole life, suddenly flared so hot and bright inside her chest that she gasped and almost pulled her wrists free of the chains by reflex. Something was coming. Not through the pass. From above it, from the high ridge to the north, where the granite turned to shale, and the shale turned to ice, and no wolf, no matter how strong, should have been able to move at speed. But something was moving up there. She could hear it just barely over the wind. Not footsteps, impacts, like a wrecking ball hitting stone at intervals. The hunters heard it too. The one in the gully lifted his head. The one behind the fallen pine adjusted his scope. They were ready. This was what they had paid for. But something was wrong. The sound was not coming from the pass. It was coming from directly overhead, and it was getting louder, and the rocks beneath Lyra's bare feet were beginning to vibrate in a way that made her think of fault lines and tectonic plates and things that moved beneath the surface of the world with absolutely no regard for what was built on top. The first hunter to die never saw what killed him. He was in the rocks above Lyra. The one on the left, a lean man with a shaved head and a tattoo of a saint on his neck. 1 second he was there. The next there was a sound like a side of beef being dropped from a great height, and then there was nothing where he had been except a red smear on the granite and a crossbow clattering down the cliff face in pieces. Lyra looked up. The wolf was enormous. She had expected large because the stories were about size, about scale, about the sheer physical mass of the thing. But the stories had lied by understatement. The wolf on the ridge above her was not large the way a grizzly is large. It was large the way a landslide is large. Dark fur, almost black, except where the moonlight caught it and turned it the color of old iron. Eyes like molten copper. A chest so broad that when it breathed, the exhale stirred the dust on the rocks 20 feet below. It was looking at her. Not at the hunters. Not at the pass. Not at the tactical situation. At her. At the silver chains on her wrists, and the skin peeling away beneath them, and the thin trail of blood running down her forearms and dripping off her elbows into the dirt. The second hunter fired. The crossbow bolt, silver-tipped and fletched with black feathers, flew true and fast and struck the wolf directly in the left shoulder. It sank in maybe half an inch. The wolf did not flinch, did not look at the shooter, did not acknowledge the bolt at all. It was staring at Lyra with an expression she had never seen on an animal's face before. Something between recognition and fury. Something that looked insanely like grief. Then it jumped. The distance from the ridge to the pass floor was 60 feet at least. The wolf covered it in a single arc, a trajectory so smooth and unhurried that it seemed to hang in the air for a moment, suspended between the moon and the earth, like something from a dream you have when a fever breaks. It landed 5 feet from Lyra. The impact cracked the granite beneath its paws. Actual cracks radiating outward like a spider web, and Lyra felt the vibration in her teeth. The remaining hunters opened fire. 3 bolts. 2 hit the wolf's flank. 1 missed and ricocheted off the rock behind Lyra's head, close enough that she felt the wind of it on her ear. The wolf turned its massive head toward the shooters, and the sound it made was not a growl. Growls she had heard. This was lower, deeper. It was the sound of something fundamental, losing patience with something small, and it vibrated in Lyra's breastbone like a struck bell. The hunter behind the fallen pine dropped his crossbow and ran. He made it maybe 30 yards before the wolf was on him, and Lyra closed her eyes for that part, because the sounds were enough. The wet crack of impact, the brief, choked scream, the silence after. When she opened her eyes, the wolf was back, standing in front of her, its muzzle dark and dripping, its copper eyes fixed on her face. The 2 remaining hunters were gone. Not dead, she thought. Fled. She could hear them crashing through the underbrush to the south, running with the particular desperation of men who have just discovered that they are not at the top of the food chain. The wolf lowered its head until its muzzle was level with Lyra's hands. Its breath was hot against her blistered wrists, and it smelled like blood and pine sap and the sharp mineral tang of deep mountain snow. It exhaled once, twice, and then very gently, with the precise delicacy of a surgeon, it closed its jaws around the silver chain on her left wrist. The sound the chain made when it broke was not dramatic, a small, clean snap like a twig. Then the same on the right side. 2 bites, 2 broken chains, and Lyra's arms fell to her sides, and the pain that had been held at bay by adrenaline came flooding in like a tide, and her knees buckled, and she went down. She expected to hit the ground. She hit fur instead. The wolf had shifted its body beneath her with a speed that should have been impossible for something that size, and she landed against its side, her face pressed into the thick ruff of its neck. The fur was coarser than she expected. Not soft, dense and wiry like the coat of a working dog that spends its life in cold weather, but warm. God, so warm. She could feel the heat of it through her clothes, through her skin, down into the marrow of her bones, and she realized she had been cold for so long years, maybe that she had forgotten what warmth felt like. Her wolf surged. Not the weak flicker she was used to, not the half-hearted pulse that she had to coax and coax just to get a slight improvement in her night vision. This was a roar, a howl, a full-throated cry from somewhere inside her that she had never accessed before, and it was not saying, run or hide or be small. It was saying one word over and over in a language that was older than speech. Mate. The great wolf went rigid beneath her. Every muscle locked. Its breathing stopped. For 3 seconds nothing moved. Then a sound came from its chest that was not a growl and not a purr, but something between the two, a vibration so low and deep that Lyra felt it in her pelvis, in her spine, in the roots of her hair. It rolled through her like a wave of warm water, and she understood with a certainty that left no room for doubt that this was not a coincidence. This was not proximity or adrenaline or the side effects of silver poisoning. The Alpha King of the 3 ranges was her mate. The shift happened in stages. The fur beneath her cheek receded. The massive body contracted, reshaped, became something harder and more angular. The heat intensified, and then there were hands on her instead of paws, human hands, enormous and calloused and extraordinarily careful, lifting her away from the rock face and cradling her against a bare chest. She looked up. Kael Voss was not handsome in the way she had imagined. The Alpha Kings in the stories she had read as a girl, the ones she had found in the Pack Library's collection of water-damaged romance novels, were always described as chiseled, sculpted, beautiful in a way that made women weak. Kael was not any of those things. His face was broad and blunt, with a nose that had been broken at least twice, and a jaw that was slightly asymmetrical, as though it had been reset wrong after a fight. A scar ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth, pulling the skin just enough to give him a permanent half-squint. His hair was black and cropped close, and there was a streak of grey at his left temple that he was too young for. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent his adult life fighting, and who had won more often than he had lost, but not without cost. His eyes were the same as the wolf's. Copper. Molten. They were fixed on her face, with an intensity that made the air between them feel solid. Who chained you? His voice was low and raw, roughened by the shift and by something else. Not anger, exactly. Something past anger. Something that had gone through anger, and come out the other side into a place that was very, very quiet. Hunters, Lyra said. Her own voice was a wreck, thin and cracked. Guild, 5 of them, they were waiting for you. I know. He looked at her wrists, at the blistered, weeping skin where the silver had eaten through. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Who sent you? No one sent me. Your Alpha. Grey Moor. He sent you as bait. Renner doesn't know I'm here." Something changed in his face. The quiet fury shifted, and beneath it, Lyra saw something she did not expect. Confusion. Genuine confusion, as though the concept of an Omega volunteering for Silver Chains was so far outside his frame of reference that he could not process it. "You chose this," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Why?" Lyra swallowed. Her throat was dry, and the silver was still in her bloodstream, making her vision swim at the edges. "Your den. The pass. There's a pup in your den. She has a septic wound on her left leg. I treated it 2 days ago, but the infection is deep. She needs proper antibiotics, not field dressings. The hunters would have found her." Kyle went very still. The kind of stillness that is not the absence of motion, but the active suppression of it. The air around him changed temperature. Lyra could feel it, could feel the barely leashed power radiating off his skin like heat from an engine block. "You know about Maren," he said. "Is that her name?" "She is my sister's child. My sister is dead. The same hunters." His voice did not waver, but something in his eyes did. A flicker, fast and sharp, like a match being struck in a dark room. "She died, leading them away from the pup, 3 weeks ago. I have been moving Maren south, looking for a healer who would treat an Ironmoor wolf without reporting it to the guild. You could have taken her to any pack healer in the north. No pack healer in the north would touch a child connected to me. The bounty makes it too dangerous. Anyone who shelters Ironmoor wolves becomes a guild target." He looked at her. "You treated her anyway. She's 4 years old with a fever of 104. I don't care whose niece she is." That silence again. The one that felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Kyle lifted one hand and touched her wrist, the ruined one, with a gentleness so at odds with his size and his blood-stained mouth that Lyra felt something crack open inside her chest. Not the bond. Something else. Something simpler and more dangerous. Trust. "I am going to take you to my den," he said. "I am going to treat these burns. And then you are going to tell me everything about the hunters' positions, their weapons, and their extraction plan. And then I am going to kill them. All of them. The ones who ran too." He said it the way another man might say, "And then I am going to make dinner." Without emphasis, without bravado, as a simple statement of scheduling. Lyra should have been afraid. She was not. He carried her. Not because she asked. Not because she could not walk, though walking would have been difficult with the silver still burning its way through her system. He carried her, because when she tried to stand, he made a sound in the back of his throat that was pure wolf. A low, insistent rumble that bypassed her brain entirely and spoke directly to the animal inside her. And her wolf, that suddenly alive and howling creature, responded by going limp in a way that her human body followed without consultation. He carried her up the pass, through the narrow gap between the boulders and into the den. Maren was awake. She was sitting up against the back wall of the shelter, her injured leg stretched out in front of her, Lyra's makeshift bandage still in place. Her eyes were dark and enormous, in a face that was too thin, and when she saw Kyle, she did not smile or cry or reach for him. She simply exhaled, as though she had been holding her breath since he left, and the exhale said everything about how many times he had left and come back and left again over the past 3 weeks, and how each time she had not been certain he would return. "Uncle Kale," she said. Her voice was small and careful, the voice of a child who has learned that noise draws attention, and attention draws danger. "I'm here." He set Lyra down on the moss and crossed to Maren in 2 strides, dropping to one knee and pressing his forehead against the child's. His hand, the one that had just crushed a man's skull, cupped the back of her head with infinite care. I brought someone. Maren looked at Lyra. Her gaze travelled down to Lyra's ruined wrists, and her small face tightened. She's hurt, Maren said. I know. Fix her. I'm going to. Lyra watched this exchange and felt something rearrange itself inside her. The Alpha King of the Three Ranges, feared by every pack in the north, spoken of in whispers and warnings, was kneeling on a moss floor in a cave taking medical instructions from a 4-year-old. His hands were still dark with blood. His shoulder still had a crossbow bolt embedded in it that he had not even bothered to remove. And his entire focus, every particle of his attention, was on a sick child who weighed maybe 35 pounds. She had expected a monster. She had gotten something worse, something more complicated. A man who destroyed with precision and tenderness in equal measure, and she had absolutely no framework for that. He dressed her wrists with supplies from a battered canvas bag in the corner of the den. Not medical supplies, field supplies, the kind you carry when you have been on the run for weeks and cannot risk stopping at a clinic. Clean cloth, a tube of burn cream that was nearly empty, a half bottle of iodine. His hands were steady and sure. He worked without speaking, and Lyra watched his face as he wrapped the cloth around her left wrist, tight enough to protect, loose enough not to restrict blood flow. The scar on his face caught the faint light from the mouth of the den. Up close, she could see that it was old, very old. The kind of scar you get as a child and carry into adulthood like a map of everywhere you have been hurt. You were young when you got that, she said. He did not look up. 7. Who? My father. He tied off the bandage, moved to the other wrist. He believed pain was an effective teaching method. He was wrong about most things, but he was especially wrong about that. Lyra filed this away. The Alpha King's father had beaten him. The Alpha King had a scar on his face from it. The Alpha King was now, years later, tenderly wrapping a stranger's wounds, while a child he was raising alone watched from a moss bed. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not say, "That must have been hard." She had been on the receiving end of enough of empty sympathy to know what it was worth. Instead, she said, "The bolt in your shoulder needs to come out before the silver tip migrates." He glanced at his shoulder as though he had genuinely forgotten about it. Later. Now, if it shifts even a centimeter toward your subclavian artery, you will bleed out in 90 seconds, and then Maren and I will be alone in a cave, in the middle of Greymore territory, with no way to get south. Take off what's left of your shirt, and sit down. He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since the pass. Not at her wounds, or her bare feet, or the scar on her neck. At her, and Lyra saw something move behind those copper eyes. Something that was not the mate bond, though the bond was there too, a constant electric hum beneath her skin. Something more immediate, more specific. He was reassessing her. The man who led 3 packs and had killed 2 hunters with his bare teeth in the last 20 minutes was looking at an Omega from a nothing pack who could barely shift, and he was recalibrating. He sat down. He removed what was left of his shirt, which was not much. The shift had destroyed it. His torso was a landscape of old violence. Scars layered over scars, claw marks, bite wounds. The raised rope-like ridge of what looked like a whip mark across his lower back. His muscles were not the sculpted kind you see in magazines. They were the dense, functional kind you get from years of work and fighting the kind that look wrong in good lighting, because they are built for use, not display. The crossbow bolt was embedded in the meat of his left deltoid, silver tip, as she had suspected. The skin around it was already turning grey. Maren, Lyra said, keeping her voice calm and light. I need you to close your eyes and count to 100 for me. Can you do that? Maren nodded. She closed her eyes. She began to count in a whisper, and Lyra thought about how no 4-year-old should be this compliant, this practiced at not watching things that hurt. She gripped the bolt shaft with her right hand. Her wrist screamed. She ignored it. "On 3, she said. "Just do it," Kyle said. She pulled. The bolt came out with a wet, sucking sound, and Kyle's breath caught once a single sharp inhale through his nose, and that was all. No sound, no flinch, no grunt of pain, just the one breath, and then he was still again. And Lyra was holding a bloody silver bolt and watching the wound in his shoulder begin to close in real time. Not fast, not the instant healing of a healthy shifter. Slow and grudging, the way a body heals when it has been running on empty for too long, but healing nonetheless. "Maren, you can open your eyes," Lyra said. 57, Maren said, and opened her eyes. "Is Uncle Kyle fixed?" "Getting there." They spent the night in the den. Lyra redressed Maren's leg wound with the last of the iodine and honey, and the child fell asleep between them, her small body generating a remarkable amount of heat for its size. Kyle sat with his back against the rock wall, positioned between the den mouth and the sleeping child, and he didn't close his eyes. Lyra didn't sleep either. "The hunters will come back," she said sometime around 2 in the morning. The wind had died down and the pass was silent, except for the distant cry of an owl. "The 2 that ran. They'll report to the guild and come back with more." "Yes." "How long do we have?" 2 days. Maybe 3 if they have to go all the way to the southern outpost for reinforcements. And your pack, Ironmoor?" 2 days south. I sent my beta ahead with the main group 3 weeks ago, when the first hunters came. I stayed behind with Maren because she was too sick to travel fast. He paused. "I have been carrying her at night and hiding during the day. The fever got worse 4 days ago. I was looking for a healer when I found the pass. You didn't find a healer. You found me." "Yes." He looked at her across the sleeping child. The copper of his eyes had dimmed to something warmer in the low light. Bronze, maybe. The color of old pennies. "I found you." Lyra's wolf stirred, not the frantic howl of mate recognition from earlier. Something quieter, a sound like a dog makes when it circles 3 times and lies down in exactly the right spot. Settling. "You should reject the bond," Lyra said. The bronze eyes did not blink. "I'm an Omega. I can barely shift. My pack considers me a waste of resources, and they're not entirely wrong. I have no family, no status, no wolf worth mentioning. The mate bond doesn't know what it's doing. It just matches sense. It doesn't account for politics or practicality." She said it clearly and without self-pity, because self-pity was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and because it was true, and because she needed him to understand that she was not the kind of woman who would use a biological accident to leverage herself into a position she had not earned. Kyle said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Are you finished?" "Yes." "Good. Because I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear it." He leaned forward slightly, and the movement brought his scent to her pine and iron, and the sharp, clean smell of snow, and her wolf went so quiet inside her that for a moment she thought it had vanished entirely. But no, it was just listening with everything it had. "My wolf has been silent for 11 years, since the day I killed my father to stop him from beating my mother to death with a fireplace poker. 11 years of nothing. No instinct, no guidance, no voice. I have led 3 packs on strategy and discipline, and the ability to make hard decisions without flinching, and I have done it alone, inside my own head, with no wolf to tell me if I was right or wrong." He paused, his hand resting on his knee curled into a fist, then released. 20 minutes ago my wolf came back. Not a whisper. Not a flicker. A full return. 11 years of silence, broken in the time it took me to smell your blood on the wind. 3 mountains away, and I smelled it, and my wolf said one word, and the word was hers, and I have been running ever since. The den was very quiet. Even the owl had stopped calling. So when you tell me that the bond doesn't know what it's doing, Kyle said, I need you to understand that my wolf was dead, and you brought it back, and I am not going to reject that. Not for politics, not for practicality, not for anything. Lyra's eyes burned. She blinked, and the burning got worse, and she realized with a distant clinical part of her brain that she was crying for the first time in 4 years, and the tears were running into the burn scar on her neck and stinging, and she didn't wipe them away. I don't know how to be a Luna, she said. I don't need a Luna. I need a healer who will pull a crossbow bolt out of my shoulder and tell me to sit down in the same breath. I need someone who will chain herself to a cliff face to protect a child she has never met. I need you. Specifically. Not the role. You. Maren made a small sound in her sleep. A sigh. She rolled over and pressed her face against Lyra's hip, and her small hand found Lyra's burned wrist and held it with a grip that was surprisingly strong. They left the den at first light. Kyle carried Maren on his back, wrapped in the wool blanket, her arms looped around his neck. Lyra walked beside him, her wrists bandaged her bare feet on the cold stone of the pass. He had offered to carry her too. She had declined. Not out of pride. Out of the practical assessment that he could not carry a child and an adult simultaneously through rough terrain for 2 days without exhausting himself, and they needed him sharp. He had accepted this reasoning without argument, which told her more about him than any speech could have. He listened. He assessed. He adjusted. He did not insist on performing strength when competence was what the situation required. They moved south through the mountains, keeping to the high ridges during the day, and descending into the valleys at night when the thermals would carry their scent upward instead of along the ground. Kyle navigated by instinct and by a detailed mental map that Lyra suspected had been built over years of running these same routes. He knew every cave, every water source, every spot where the rock overhang was deep enough to block their heat signature from above. On the second day, Lyra's wolf did something it had never done before. They were crossing a narrow ledge, the kind with a 200-foot drop on one side and a sheer wall on the other, and Maren's fever had spiked again, and the child was whimpering in her sleep, and Lyra was focused on her footing, placing each bare foot with care on the cold, slick rock when she felt it. A pulse. Not from outside. From inside. From the place in her chest where her wolf lived, that basement apartment she had always imagined as dark and cramped and barely furnished. The pulse was warm. It spread outward from her core into her limbs, and suddenly the rock under her feet was not cold anymore. Suddenly, her wrists did not hurt. Suddenly the ledge was not narrow because she could feel the rock the way a climber feels a wall with perfect spatial awareness, every handhold and foothold mapped in 3 dimensions. She stopped. Kyle stopped. He turned to look at her, and his eyes widened. "Your eyes," he said. "What about them?" "They're gold." Lyra blinked. She did not have gold eyes. She had brown eyes, dark brown, the color of the river mud she had spent her childhood playing in. But when she looked down at her hands, she could see the faint glow reflecting off her bandages. A warm amber gold coming from her own face. "That's not an Omega trait," Kyle said very quietly. "No." "That's an Alpha trait." Lyra opened her mouth and closed it. Her wolf pulsed again, and the sensation was so strong, so present, so fundamentally different from the weak flicker she had lived with for 23 years that she could not pretend she didn't know what was happening. She had always known. In the way you know something you have buried so deep that it exists only as a pressure, a weight, a thing that makes it hard to breathe but that you cannot name. Her mother had died giving birth to her. Her father had raised her alone until the fire took him when she was 9. After that, the Greymoor pack had taken her in, and the pack healer had assessed her wolf as weak, nearly dormant, and categorized her as Omega, the lowest rank, the least powerful. But the pack healer had also noted something in the file that Lyra had read once at age 16 when she had snuck into the infirmary records looking for information about her mother's cause of death. A single line written in the healer's cramped handwriting and then crossed out with a heavy black pen. The line read, "Wolf signature inconsistent with Omega classification. Recommend secondary assessment." The secondary assessment had never happened. Lyra had never asked why. She had known why. Because in Greymoor, Omegas were useful. Omegas cooked and cleaned and healed and asked for nothing. An Omega with a strong wolf was a complication. A female with an alpha signature was a threat to the pack hierarchy. Easier to cross out the note. Easier to let the wolf stay dormant. Easier to let the girl believe she was nothing. "My mother," Lyra said. "I don't know her pack. My father never talked about her. But when I was a child, I could do things. Small things. I could make plants grow faster by holding them. I could find water underground by feeling for it. My father told me to stop. He said it was dangerous. He said people would come for me if they found out. People like the guild. Yes." Kyle was very still. The kind of still that meant his mind was working at full speed behind those bronze eyes. The guild does not hunt random alphas. They hunt specific bloodlines. Bloodlines with abilities that go beyond standard shifter capacity. Bloodlines they can monetize. You think that's why they're really here. I think the bounty on me is real. But I think the guild has been in this territory before. 23 years ago, maybe. Looking for a woman with a specific set of abilities. And I think your father set that fire himself to make them believe she was dead. The words landed in Lyra's chest, like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, disturbing everything they touched. Her father quiet and careful, and always looking over his shoulder. Her father who had taught her to keep her head down, to never show what she could do, to be small and invisible, and safe. Her father who had died in a fire that the pack had ruled accidental, but that had never made sense, because her father had been the most cautious man she had ever known, and he did not leave candles burning or stoves unattended. He had burned their cabin to destroy the evidence, to protect her, even in death. Lyra breathed, in and out. The golden light in her eyes flickered and steadied. "We need to move," she said. "Marin's fever is climbing again, and we're exposed up here." Kyle nodded. He did not push. He did not ask more questions. He simply adjusted the child on his back and kept walking, and Lyra followed, and the golden light in her eyes didn't fade. On the evening of the second day, they descended into the Ironmoor Valley. Lyra smelled the pack before she saw it, not the stale, closed-in smell of Greymoor, where 200 wolves lived in prefab houses, arranged in tight rows, and the air always carried the faint tang of resentment. This was different. Wood smoke, and roasting meat, and the green resinous scent of old-growth pine. Horses. Wet dog. The sharp, clean smell of a fast-moving river. And underneath it all, like a bass note, beneath a melody, the rich, complex signature of a pack that was both large and healthy, a scent so layered and alive that Lyra's wolf responded to it the way a plant responds to sunlight. The first wolves appeared on the tree line as they descended, grey shapes moving through the pines, silent and watchful. They did not approach. They did not need to. Lyra could feel them assessing their collective attention like a weight on her skin. The stranger, the unknown wolf. The woman walking beside their alpha king with burned wrists and bare feet, and eyes that were intermittently the wrong color. A man emerged from the trees, tall, red-haired with a close-cropped beard and the build of someone who split firewood for recreation. He dropped to one knee the instant he saw Kyle, his head lowered, his right fist pressed to his chest. Alpha. We expected you 2 days ago. Complications. Kyle shifted Maren from his back to his arms. Get the healer. Her fever is worse. The red-haired man rose. His gaze landed on Lyra and stayed there. Who is she? Mine. One word. No elaboration. No qualification. No softening. The red-haired man's eyebrows rose to approximately the middle of his forehead, and then he looked at Lyra again, and this time his assessment was different. Not who is this stranger? Who is this person I am going to be answering to? Yes, Alpha. He turned and disappeared into the trees at a run. The Ironmore compound was not what Lyra had expected. There were no prefab houses, no guard towers, no chain-link fencing topped with wolfsbane wire. The pack lived in a sprawling network of log structures built into the natural contours of the valley, some nestled against cliff faces, others cantilevered over the river on massive timber beams. Smoke rose from stone chimneys. Children chased each other between the buildings, human-shaped and wolf-shaped, interchangeably, and no one yelled at them to stop or be quiet or come inside. It looked like a place where people lived. Actually lived as opposed to the way Greymore wolves lived, which was more like a supervised containment. The healer was a woman named Dessa, round-faced and sharp-eyed with calloused hands, and the no-nonsense energy of someone who had been woken up from a nap and was choosing not to hold it against anyone. She took one look at Maren's leg, whistled through her teeth, and carried the child into a stone building that smelled of dried herbs and antiseptic. She'll need IV antibiotics, Dessa said over her shoulder, and fluids. She's dehydrated. 2, maybe 3 days before the fever breaks. Whatever she needs, Kyle said. And that one. Dessa jerked her chin at Lyra. Silver burns. Both wrists. I can smell it from here. After the pup, she's next. Kyle looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at her wrists. The bandages he had applied in the den were soaked through, now rust-brown with dried blood and the pale yellow of serum. They needed changing. They had needed changing 6 hours ago. She had not mentioned it, because Maren was the priority, and because she was used to being the last person in any room to receive care. Go with Dessa, Kyle said. Not an order. A request phrased in the imperative because he had probably never phrased a request any other way, but a request nonetheless. After Maren is stabilized. Lyra. Maren first, then me. That is not a negotiation. The red-haired man whose name was Ronan, and who was apparently Kyle's beta, coughed into his fist and looked away. Kyle's jaw tightened. His wolf flashed behind his eyes, copper and hot and deeply unhappy about being told no. But he did not argue. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, and then he nodded once, and Lyra followed Dessa into the healer's building, and the door closed behind her. She did not see the way Kyle stood outside that door for 20 minutes without moving. She did not see the way Ronan approached him twice and was dismissed with a look. She did not see the way the Alpha King of the 3 Rangers, who had killed a hunter with his bare jaws 24 hours ago, pressed his forehead against the wooden frame of the healer's door, and breathed through his mouth like a man in pain, because his mate was behind that door, and she was hurt, and she would not let him help, and that was a kind of suffering he had no training for. But Maren saw it, through the window, and she filed it away with the precision of a child who has learned to read adults the way other children read picture books. 3 days passed. Maren's fever broke on the second night, dramatic and sudden, like a knot being cut. 1 hour she was burning. The next she was sitting up in bed, demanding soup and asking why her blanket smelled different. "Because it's clean," Dessa said. "I don't like it." "Nobody asked you." Lyra's wrists healed slower. The silver had gone deeper than surface burns usually do, and Dessa, after examining the tissue under a magnifying glass, sat back on her stool and gave Lyra a look that was half concern and half something else. Curiosity, maybe. The kind of curiosity that a healer gets when a body does something it should not be able to do. "Your tissue is regenerating," Dessa said. "Not like an omega, like a dominant." "I'm aware." "You're aware. Interesting." Dessa folded her arms. "Are you also aware that your wolf signature has been strengthening steadily since you arrived? Because I ran your baseline when you came in, and it read as low-grade omega, and I ran it again this morning, and it read as mid-tier beta. It's been doing that. It's been doing that. Right? And the eyes, the gold that just happens too. It's new. New." Dessa uncrossed her arms and leaned forward. "Let me tell you what I think is happening, because I have been a healer for 31 years, and I have never seen this before. I think your wolf was suppressed, not dormant. Suppressed, actively held down either by external means or by your own subconscious for a very long time. And I think the mate bond is acting as a catalyst, breaking down whatever was holding it in place, which means that your wolf is not weak. Your wolf has been caged, and the cage is opening." Lyra looked at her hands. The bandages were thinner now, the burns healing faster than Dessa's initial timeline had predicted. Beneath the cloth, new skin was forming, pink and tender, and whole. "What am I?" she asked. Dessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you're something the Guild has been looking for a very long time. And I think your parents knew that. And I think they did everything they could to hide you. And I think if I'm right, then the hunters who came to the pass were not just after Kale." The 4th day brought a delegation from Greymoor. Not Renna. Renna, true to form, had sent his proxy. A beta named Thorn, tall and angular, with prematurely silver hair and a voice like a door hinge that needed oiling. Thorn had been the one who supervised Lyra's work in the healing shed, who allocated her supplies, which was to say, gave her the expired bandages and the dented tins of antiseptic that the real infirmary didn't want, who had once told her in front of 3 other pack members that her value to Greymoor was roughly equivalent to a good first aid kit and twice as replaceable. Thorn arrived at the Ironmoor compound with 2 escorts and a formal request for Lyra's return. He dismounted his horse in the main clearing, straightened his coat, and surveyed the compound with the faintly disdainful expression of a man visiting a country he considers beneath him. Lyra was sitting on the porch of the healer's building, rebandaging her own wrist in the morning sunlight when she saw him. Her stomach contracted. Not fear, exactly. Something older. The automatic shrinking reflex of a body that has learned to make itself small in the presence of a specific stimulus. Then her wolf growled, low, deep, a sound that vibrated through her ribcage and made her hands go still on the bandage. Not a fearful sound. A warning. Her wolf was warning her own body not to shrink, not to flinch, not to do what it had always done. Thorn saw her. He crossed the clearing in long strides, his escorts trailing behind him. "There you are. Alpha Renna requests your immediate return. You have duties." Lyra finished tying the bandage. She did not stand up. "You left without permission," Thorn continued. You approached the hunters without authorization. You engaged with a foreign alpha without clearance. These are serious infractions. Good morning, Thorn. Don't play games. You are Greymore property. The word landed in the clearing like a brick through a window. Property. Lyra saw it register on the faces of the Ironmoor wolves nearby. Two women carrying laundry paused mid-step. A man chopping wood lowered his axe. Ronan, standing by the main hall, turned slowly like a gun turret. Thorn did not notice. Thorn was not the kind of man who noticed the temperature of a room until the room was on fire. Pack up whatever you brought. We leave in an hour. He turned to go. No. Thorn stopped, turned back. His face was the face of a man who has just heard a piece of furniture refuse an order. No, he said. No, I'm not leaving. You don't have that option. You are a registered Omega of the Greymore Pack. Your Alpha has summoned you. You will comply. Renner is not my Alpha anymore. The clearing had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that happens in nature when a predator enters the area and every prey animal freezes simultaneously. Lyra could feel it. The shift, the tilt, the moment when the air pressure changes, and everyone present understands on a cellular level that something is about to happen. Kyle emerged from the main hall. He was dressed, which Lyra was privately grateful for, because the last 3 days had involved a significant amount of shirtless proximity that had been testing her composure in ways she wasn't ready to examine. Dark shirt rolled to the elbows, dark trousers, boots. His hair was damp. He looked like he had just come from a wash, and he looked in the morning light less like a myth and more like a man. And somehow that was worse, because myths could be held at a distance, and men could not. He walked to the center of the clearing and stopped. He did not look at Thorn. He looked at Lyra. This one bothering you, he said. I'm handling it. I can see that. He looked at Thorn. Thorn, to his credit, or perhaps to his survival instinct, took a step back. You are Greymoor's beta. I am. And I am here under Alpha Renner's authority to retrieve our Omega healer. She is not your Omega healer. She has been registered with Greymoor since she was 9 years old. She is not your Omega healer, Kyle repeated in the same tone at the same volume, and yet somehow the second time it sounded like a coffin lid closing. She is my mate. She is under my protection. And if your Alpha has a problem with that, he can come here and say it to my face instead of sending a proxy to call my mate property in my own territory. Thorn's face went through several colors in rapid succession. White, red, a greenish-gray that suggested his survival instinct was finally filing its report. The Alpha King claims a Greymoor Omega, Thorn said, and his voice had changed. Not softer, more careful. The voice of a man who is suddenly very aware of how far from home he is. This will require formal proceedings. The Lunar Council will need to be notified. Notify whoever you want. Kyle crossed his arms. She stays. Thorn looked at Lyra, and for one moment, just a fraction of a second, something passed across his face that was not disdain or authority or the practiced superiority of a beta asserting rank over an Omega. It was something smaller, something that looked in a certain light almost like doubt, as though some part of him, buried deep beneath years of pack hierarchy and the comfort of knowing exactly where everyone ranked, was looking at Lyra and wondering if he had missed something. If he had been wrong, if the expired bandages and the dented tins and the casual cruelties had been visited upon someone who wasn't in fact what he had been told she was. It lasted a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, neutral expression of a man who had decided that the safest course of action was to leave and report back. I will convey your message to Alpha Renner, Thorn said. He turned on his heel. He walked to his horse. He mounted. He left with his escorts trailing behind him, and the clearing slowly returned to life around the empty space where he had stood. Kyle watched them go. Then he turned to Lyra. "You're shaking," he said. Lyra looked at her hands. He was right. They were trembling fine and fast, the kind of tremor that comes not from cold, but from the aftershock of standing your ground when every cell in your body has been trained to give way. "That's the first time I've said no to Greymore," she said, "in 14 years. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, that furnace heat that seemed to radiate from his skin like a promise, and he waited. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me handle it. You didn't need me. I know. That's why I'm thanking you, because you knew that and you let me do it anyway." Something shifted in his face. The hard lines softened. Not much. A fraction. The tightening around his eyes eased, and for just a moment the Alpha King looked like a man who had been given something rare and did not quite know how to hold it. "Lyra." "Yes." "When you're ready. When your wrists are healed and Maren is strong enough to be out of Dessa's care. I want to mark you. I want to claim you in front of my pack. I want everyone from here to the southern border to know that you are mine, and I am yours, and no one will ever call you property again." Her wolf howled, not in fear, in answer. "When I'm ready," Lyra said. "When you're ready." 1 week. That was how long the peace lasted. Maren was recovering, walking now with a slight limp that Dessa said would fade as the muscle tissue regenerated. The child had attached herself to Lyra with the tenacity of a barnacle, following her from the healer's building to the kitchens to the river, where Lyra had begun gathering herbs to stock what she was privately calling her new healing shed, which was in fact an entire stone building that Kyle had assigned to her, without being asked, fully equipped with supplies that were not expired and tins that were not dented. Lyra's wrists had healed. Not fully. Scars remained, thin silver lines that circled both wrists like bracelets, and Dessa said they would never fade completely, because silver burns left marks that went deeper than skin. But the pain was gone, and the function was complete, and her hands were steady when she worked. Her wolf was changing. Every day it was stronger. Every day the golden flicker in her eyes lasted longer, burned brighter. Dessa ran her signature weekly, and the readings climbed. Beta, high beta, and then, on the 6th day, the reading that made Dessa put down her instruments and sit in silence for a full minute. Alpha. Not mid-tier. Not borderline. Full alpha. A reading that put Lyra's wolf signature on par with the most powerful females in the Northern Territories. "Your wolf was never weak," Dessa said. "It was contained, like a river behind a dam. The dam is breaking, and when it finishes breaking, you are going to be something that has not existed in the Northern Packs for a very long time." What? An alpha female with healing abilities. The old bloodlines. The ones the Guild has been systematically hunting to extinction for the last 50 years. Dessa met her eyes. "Your mother was one of them, wasn't she?" Lyra did not answer. She did not need to. The hunters came back on the 7th day. Not 5 of them. 20. 2 black trucks with no plates, bristling with weapons and wolfsbane canisters. They came from the north through the high pass that Lyra and Kyle had used, and they came fast, and they came in daylight, which meant they were not interested in stealth anymore. They were interested in force. Ronan brought the report to Kyle at dawn. Lyra was with him in the main hall, reviewing Maren's latest blood work at a long oak table that smelled of beeswax and old smoke. Kyle read the report in silence, his face expressionless, and then he set it down and looked at Lyra, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "They're not here for me," he said. "No," Lyra agreed. "They're here for me. How long have you known?" "Since the pass. The hunters were Guild. The Guild tracks bloodlines. My mother's bloodline. They chained me to the cliff because they wanted you, but they also wanted to know what I was." Silver burns differently on different wolves. The reaction? I had the depth of the burns, the way my body fought the poison. Those readings would have told them everything they needed to know. Kyle's jaw clenched. "They used you as a test. And a lure. 2 for 1. I'm going to kill them. You're going to defend your pack. There are 20 of them, and they have wolfsbane. This isn't a personal vendetta. This is a siege." He stared at her. She stared back. The mate bond hummed between them, and in that hum Lyra could feel his wolf massive and furious and desperately achingly afraid for her, and she could also feel her own wolf no longer small, no longer quiet, no longer the thing that lived in the basement and asked for nothing. Her wolf was standing up. "I need to be part of this," she said. "Absolutely not. Kyle, my abilities, the healing, it's not just herbs and bandages. You know that. Dessa knows that. I can feel the pack, all of them. I can feel their wolves the way I can feel water underground. If anyone gets hurt in this fight, I can reach them. I can stabilize them. But I need to be close. You need to be safe. I need to be useful. Those are not the same thing, and you know the difference better than anyone." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Ronan cleared his throat. "She's right, Alpha. I didn't ask. No, but she's right, and you know it, and the fact that it terrifies you doesn't change the tactical reality." Kyle looked at his beta. Ronan met his gaze without flinching, which Lyra suspected was something very few people could do. Then Kyle looked at Lyra, and the fear was still there, but behind it something else was rising. Something that looked like respect, in its purest, most reluctant form. "You stay behind the front line. You do not engage directly. If I tell you to run, you run. If you tell me to run, I will evaluate the situation and make a decision based on tactical merit." "Lyra." "That's the deal." Ronan made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been a laugh. Kyle closed his eyes for a count of 3, and when he opened them, the fear had been folded away, tucked into whatever compartment he kept all the things he could not afford to feel during battle. "Fine," he said. "Stay close. Stay alive. If you die, I will never forgive you." Noted. The Battle of Ironmoor Valley lasted 47 minutes. The hunters came in from the north in 2 groups, 10 in each truck. They deployed wolfsbane canisters at the tree line, creating a toxic perimeter that forced the Ironmoor wolves to engage in human form or risk the gas. They had silver net launchers. They had crossbows with silver bolts. They had tranquilizer rifles loaded with doses calibrated for alpha physiology. What they did not have was any idea what they were walking into. Kyle had spent 20 years fighting. Not the ritualized, controlled fighting of pack challenges. Real fighting. Border wars. Rogue incursions. The kind of combat that teaches you that the most important weapon is not your teeth or your claws, but the ground itself. He had positioned his wolves in the valley, the way a chess master positions pieces. Not to meet the hunters head-on, but to funnel them, to channel their advance into a narrow corridor between the river and the cliff face, where their numbers meant nothing, and their vehicles could not follow. The first truck hit the trap line 40 seconds after crossing the tree line. The road, such as it was, had been undermined overnight. The front axle dropped into a trench that Ronan's team had dug and covered with branches and loose dirt, and the truck tilted forward and stopped, and the hunters inside spilled out into waist-high brush that had been soaked in wolfsbane neutralizing agent, a recipe that Lyra had found in one of Dessa's old textbooks and mixed in a rain barrel at 3 in the morning. The second truck tried to go around. It made it 50 yards before the Ironmore wolves closed in from both sides, moving through the trees like smoke, and the sound of the impact. 20 wolves hitting steel and glass, and the soft bodies inside was something that belonged in a different kind of story. Lyra stood on the ridge above the valley behind the front line as promised, and she did what she was made to do. Not fight, not kill. Something harder, something that required every ounce of the power that had been caged inside her for 23 years. She healed. A wolf went down 30 yards from the river, hit in the flank by a silver bolt. Lyra felt it. Not saw it. Felt it the way you feel your own hand when you cut it, a sudden sharp awareness of a specific body in a specific location. She reached. Not with her hands, with whatever it was inside her that had been growing since the night in the den. That warm, golden thing that her mother had given her and her father had hidden, and the world had tried to erase. She reached and she found the wolf's wound, and she held it together from the inside, the way she had once held plants, together the way she had always known she could hold living things together, if she just stopped pretending she could not. The wolf got up. Another went down. And another. And each time Lyra reached, and each time she held, and the golden light in her eyes blazed so bright that the wolves on the ridge around her turned to stare, and the air around her shimmered with heat. And she understood finally completely, with the full force of 23 years of suppressed knowledge, what she was. She was not an Omega. She had never been an Omega. She was an alpha healer of the old bloodline, the kind that the songs called the Bone Menders, the kind that could hold a pack together through sheer force of will and love, and the stubborn refusal to let anyone under her care die. The hunters broke in 38 minutes. The ones who could still run, ran. The ones who could not were subdued and restrained with their own silver cuffs. One did not run. The leader. The man with the jaw like a cinder block and silver rings on every finger. The one who had chained Lyra to the cliff. He stood in the wreckage of his operation, surrounded by Ironmore wolves, and he looked up at the ridge where Lyra stood, and his face was not defiant or furious or afraid. It was resigned. "We knew about your mother," he said. His voice carried clearly in the sudden silence of the valley. "We were told her line ended in that fire. We were told the daughter died. You were told wrong." "Yeah." He looked at the silver rings on his fingers, turned them one by one with the slow deliberation of a man who is choosing what to do with the last few minutes of his freedom. "Your mother. Her name was Sarah. She was a healer at the old Thornvale Pack, before the guild liquidated it. She could mend a shattered bone by laying her hands on the skin. I saw her do it once when I was young, before I joined the guild, before I became this." He gestured at himself, at the black tactical gear, at the weapons, at the wreckage. "She healed my brother. He'd been thrown from a horse. His spine was broken, paralyzed from the chest down. The pack healer said there was nothing to be done. Sarah walked in, put her hands on his back, and he walked out of that room 20 minutes later." He paused. "I joined the guild 6 months after that, because they told me they were trying to study the bloodline, to replicate the ability to make it available to everyone. That was the pitch. Make healing accessible. Democratize it. Save lives. And instead we hunted them, caged them, took them apart to see how they worked." His voice did not crack. It was beyond cracking. It was the voice of a man who had passed through guilt so many years ago that it had become landscape something he lived inside, rather than something he felt. "Your mother was the last one we found. She got away. We burned the records. We told the guild she was dead. The agent who filed that report, the one who closed the file on the Thornvale bloodline. He looked at Lyra. That was me. The valley was silent. Lyra stood on the ridge, golden-eyed hands, still trembling with the residual energy of holding 6 wolves together through silver wounds, and she looked at the man who had chained her to a cliff, and also decades ago had saved her mother's file by lying to his superiors. "Why?" she said. "Because your mother healed my brother, and my brother lived to have a daughter, and his daughter has the same gift. And the guild does not know about her. And if you do, what I think you're going to do, if you stand up and show the world what you are, then my niece has a chance, a real chance, because you can't hunt what has a king standing in front of it." Lyra looked at Kyle, who had shifted back to human form and was standing at the base of the ridge, blood on his hands and his chest and his face, watching her with those copper eyes. He had heard everything. His expression was unreadable. "Take him to the holding cells," Kyle said to Ronan. "He'll answer for the attack. But he lives." Ronan hesitated. "Alpha. He lives." The hunter went without resistance. As Ronan's wolves led him away, he passed within 3 feet of Lyra. He did not look at her. But he said very quietly, "You look like her." And then he was gone. The marking ceremony happened 3 days after the battle, on a night when the moon was so full and low that it looked like a hole punched in the sky, leaking white light. Lyra stood in the center of the Ironmoor gathering circle, which was a natural amphitheater carved into the valley wall by 10,000 years of river erosion. The stone was smooth and pale, and it held the moonlight like a bowl holds water. 300 wolves stood on the tiers above in human form, and wolf form silent and watchful. Maren sat in the front row, her injured leg stretched out on a cushion that Dessa had grudgingly provided her dark eyes wide and solemn. Lyra was wearing a dress. This fact felt absurd, given the context, but Dessa had insisted, and Dessa was, as Lyra had learned, the kind of woman you didn't argue with about things she had decided. The dress was simple. Dark green, long-sleeved, soft against the new scars on her wrists. It smelled of cedar, and the particular warmth of a chest that has been closed for a long time, and recently opened, and Lyra suspected it had belonged to someone important, once, though Dessa had not said who. Kyle stood facing her. He was in black as always, and his face was the same blunt, scarred landscape it had always been. And he was looking at her the way he had looked at her, in the den in the pass, in the clearing, when Thorn had called her property. Like she was the answer to a question he had stopped asking a long time ago. "I am not going to make a speech," he said, his voice carried in the amphitheater, not because he raised it, but because the stone was designed to carry sound, and 300 wolves were holding their breath. "I am not good at speeches. I am good at fighting, and at keeping peoples alive, and at knowing when I see something true, that it is true." He stepped closer, close enough that Lyra could feel the heat of him, close enough that she could see the grey at his temple, and the scar on his face, and the way his hands, those massive, battle-hardened hands, were shaking. The Alpha King's hands were shaking. "You chained yourself to a cliff for a child you had never met," he said. "You pulled a crossbow bolt out of my shoulder and told me to sit down. You said no to a pack that had owned you for 14 years, and you did not flinch. You stood on a ridge and held 6 of my wolves together through silver wounds, with nothing but your will and your blood, and whatever your mother put inside you that the world tried to burn out of existence." His voice dropped. "I have been afraid 3 times in my life. Once when my father broke my face. Once when my sister died. And once when I smelled your blood on the wind 3 mountains away. And I didn't know if I would reach you in time." Lyra felt the tears start again. She did not fight them. I am going to mark you now, Kyle said, and then you are going to be my mate, and my Luna, and the healer of this pack, and no one, not the guild, not Greymore, not any force in the world above or below, is ever going to take you from me. If that is what you want. That is what I want. He leaned in. His mouth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, the place where the old burned scar ended, and clean skin began. And she felt his teeth, not gentle, not rough, somewhere in between, the precise pressure of a man who destroys and protects in equal measure, and has finally found the one thing in the world that requires both. The bite, the mark, the bond which had been humming since the pass, since the den, since the first moment his wolf had broken 11 years of silence, for the smell of her blood erupted. Not a hum anymore. A chord, a full resonant ringing chord that started in the place where his teeth met her skin and radiated outward through her chest, her spine, her wolf, and then further outward into the pack, into the wolves on the tiers, into the stone itself, until the whole amphitheater was vibrating with it. 300 wolves feeling what she felt, knowing what she knew. Understanding, in the deep, wordless way that wolves understand, things that their alpha king had found his mate, and she was not weak, and she was not broken, and she was not an omega. She was theirs. The sound that rose from 300 throats was not a cheer. It was a howl. One voice, then 10, then 100, then all of them, and Lyra's wolf, that golden, unleashed, incandescent thing that had spent 23 years in a cage, threw back its head and joined them. Kyle held her, his arms around her, his face buried in her hair, his breathing ragged. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest, fast and hard, the heartbeat of a man who has spent his whole life being strong enough, and has finally found the one person he does not have to be strong for. "I've got you," he said. She pressed her face against his chest. The scar on her neck throbbed, where his mark was already healing into the skin, and her wrists, those silver-scarred wrists that would always carry the memory of the chains, were wrapped around his waist, and she could feel beneath the scars the steady pulse of her own blood, alive and warm and running. "I know," she said, later, much later, when the howls had faded, and the pack had dispersed, and the moon had climbed to the top of the sky. Lyra sat on the porch of the healer's building and looked out over the valley. The compound was quiet. Wood smoke drifted from the last dying fires. The river made its constant sound, running over stones it had been running over for centuries. Maren appeared in the doorway behind her, barefoot, wearing a nightgown that was too big for her, the sleeves trailing past her hands. "Can't sleep," Lyra said. "No." Maren sat down beside her, cross-legged, her healed leg tucked carefully. She was carrying something, a small object held in both hands. She placed it in Lyra's lap without ceremony. It was a wolf, carved from a piece of pine, rough and unfinished but recognizable. 4 legs, a tail, a head, tilted back in a howl. Maren had made it, had been making it for days in the corner of the healer's building, with a small knife that Dessa had given her, and strict instructions not to cut herself. "It's you," Maren said. "Your wolf." Lyra picked it up. It was light. The wood was still fresh, still fragrant, and the knife marks were uneven the way a child's work always is. Each cut a small act of concentration and intent. "It's beautiful," Lyra said. "I know." Maren leaned against her side, her small body heavy with approaching sleep. "Uncle Kyle said you're staying." "I'm staying." "Good." Maren's eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. Lyra held the wooden wolf in one hand, and the sleeping child against her side with the other, and the moonlight fell across them both. And the river ran, and the compound slept, and Somewhere in the dark of the main hall, Kyle Voss stood at a window and watched his mate hold his niece, and his wolf that resurrected impossible 11 years. Silent Wolf was quiet. Not silent. Not dormant. Quiet. The way a thing is quiet when it is for the first time in its life at rest. Lyra turned the wooden wolf in her fingers. She could smell the pine sap on it, fresh and sharp, and, beneath that, the faint, warm scent of a child's hands. She set it on the railing beside her, facing the valley, its small carved mouth open to the moon. Then she closed her eyes and listened to the river and the wind and the slow, steady heartbeat of the child sleeping against her side.